Good evening, and welcome to Sleepy Night. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, we'll share another gentle story and helps your heart rest easy before sleep. This is the story of a man's journey, a man who lost his way through most of his life. Once, he had been a bright and gentle student, but family misfortunes and a string of wrong choices led him far astray until he found himself time and again behind bars, carrying the weight of everyone's disappointment in his eyes. And yet, even in the deepest shadows, sometimes a hand will still reach out. In this story, that man crosses paths with an old friend, a friend who has since become a judge. And from that meeting comes something unexpected, a chance to begin again, to make amends, to rediscover himself. Let this story guide you gently towards sleep with a slow, soothing rhythm. And now, let us begin. The courtroom was utterly still. David stood there, his head bowed low, his wrists chilled by the cold weight of iron cuffs. His whole body seemed to shrink, as if he wished to vanish from every pair of eyes upon him. Then the judge's voice rang out firm and commanding. "Defendant, lift your head." Slowly, David raised his face. From the high bench above, a middle-aged man in a black robe looked down at him. His eyes were sharp, steady, filled with authority. But as they lingered on David, longer than one might expect, there was something else, as though he was searching. And then, the judge's tone softened, his words measured and calm. "David Miller, do you remember me?" David frowned, confusion flickering across his face. He shook his head, lips cracked and trembling, unable to form a sound. The judge leaned slightly forward, his voice lowered, almost like a sigh. "We once sat in the same classroom at Westbrook. I used to share my lunch with you. You were one of the brightest students back then." For a moment, a faint light stirred in David's eyes. A distant memory drifted back, the ringing of a school bell, a desk by the window, and a boy sitting beside him named Michael. His breath caught in his chest. The whole room seemed to spin, blurred through eyes clouded with tears. And then, trembling, he whispered, "Michael." The judge gave a slight nod. In his eyes, there was no trace of scorn, only a sorrow that ran deep. In that very moment, David broke down. Tears poured over his hollow face. But they were not only tears of emotion, they were tears of shame. He covered his face, his entire body shaking. A raw, broken sob escaped him, echoing awkwardly in the silent chamber. Not because of the sentence about to be delivered, not because of the iron shackles on his wrists, but because in the gaze of his old friend, he saw the reflection of who he once was, the boy he had betrayed, the self he had lost so long ago. The white light poured over the courtroom, making David's hollow face appear even more gaunt. He sat motionless, his eyes swollen and red, his head bowed so low he seemed afraid even to breathe. Before the wooden bench, Michael, his old classmate, now a judge, remained stern, though his eyes carried a sorrow too heavy to hide. The silence in the room was tense. The verdict seemed inevitable. David was a repeat offender, a man who had been in prison many times before. By law, he deserved a harsh sentence. Everyone in the courtroom waited to hear it. But then Michael's voice rose, slow, deep, and warm, so unlike the cold detachment of other trials. Defendant David Miller, the court has reviewed your record and knows you have reoffended many times. Ordinarily, the punishment would be severe, but Michael paused, his eyes lingering on the trembling man in the prisoner's uniform. But the court also sees a man who was once a model student, a boy who carried dreams, who was trusted by teachers and friends. Life led you astray, but no one is born to remain lost forever. A murmur rippled through the room. David trembled, his hands clenching, his heart racing wildly. Michael tapped the gavel lightly, then continued, "Therefore, this sentence will be lighter. Your time in prison will be enough for reflection, enough to search for yourself again. And when you are released," his voice faltered, caught in his throat. Then, slowly, with deliberate weight, he said, "I will be there. I will meet you at the gate. And I hope, with all the memories of youth still alive within you, you will change." A wave of emotion rose. David covered his face, his body shaking. The shame was still there, yet this time, in his chest, something else flickered. A faint spark, small but warm. The trial ended. They led David away, the clinking of chains echoing down the long corridor. But in his heart, for the first time in many years, there was more than darkness. Time in prison passed heavily, yet quietly, like the slow drift of a river. Each day was the same. Rising early, sweeping floors, a plain meal, returning to the cold iron bed. At night, he lay awake, listening to the wind whistling through the narrow window. And in his mind, Michael's words echoed, "When you are released, I will be there." At first, David did not believe. His life had been too full of lies and betrayals. But as the days passed, that promise became a faint lantern in his mind, guiding him to endure. And then the day came. The prison gates opened. Sunlight spilled in bright, almost blinding. David stepped out, thin and frail in his old clothes, a small canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He thought no one would be there, but just beyond the gate, a car was waiting. The door opened, and Michael stepped out. No longer the judge in a black robe, but a man in a simple grey suit, his face kind, his eyes still steady. David froze, his heart clenched. You really came?" he whispered, hoarse and trembling. Michael smiled, quiet, gentle, as if no years had ever stood between them. "I promised, didn't I? An old friend is still a friend. Come on, get in." David lowered his head. The shame rose again, but this time, with it, came a warm tear sliding down his cheek. He nodded and slowly walked toward the car. On the road back to the city, they sat in silence for a long while. The hum of the engine blended with the wind outside. At last, Michael spoke. "David, I cannot walk this road for you, but you must try again. However hard it is, you must try. You still have a chance." David looked out the window, at the rows of trees rushing past, at the people walking along the sidewalks, at the ordinary life he had lost so long ago. He pressed his lips tight, then nodded. "I'll try." But deep inside, he knew the road ahead would not be easy. After Michael welcomed him back, David carried a fragile hope. He knocked on doors, applied at shops, at construction sites, anywhere that might take him. But each time, he was turned away. The record of his crimes, his aging face, his frail body, no one wanted to trust him. At night, he rented a damp, shabby room, its walls stained, the air heavy with mildew. He ate meager meals, stale bread, cheap canned soup. Lying on the creaking bed, he wondered how long he could last. Michael called now and then. "Be patient," he urged. "One day people will see your effort." But David knew patience could not fill an empty stomach. One afternoon, wandering the streets, he heard a familiar call. "Hey, Dave, still breathing, huh?" He turned, and there they were, old faces from his youth, the ones who had pulled him into theft and trouble long ago. They looked no better now, shabby, reckless, hardened. They clapped him on the shoulder, laughing. "Out of prison, huh? Forget those jobs, come back with us." "Who's gonna hire an ex-con?" "There's a job coming. Big department store. Quick, clean. No one will know." David shook his head, his voice trembling. I don't want to go back to that life." They sneered. "You think you've got a choice? A man like you? Who's going to give you a chance? Come with us. You'll at least have money to eat." That night, back in his cold room, David lay in darkness. The wind cut through the narrow window. He clenched his fists, knowing he stood once again at the same crossroad. And then, out on the street, the department store's bright windows lit the night. The gang whispered plans. David followed, his steps heavy as lead. Across the street, he suddenly saw Michael, carrying a paper bag of groceries, his face calm and steady. A pang pierced David's chest. He heard a voice within. "You'll stand in court again, in front of him once more." Sweat broke across his brow. His friends pressed him. "Come on, Dave. Now's the time." David turned away, unable to meet Michael's eyes. But the image burned inside him, brighter than any street light. He knew if he stepped inside that store, there would be only one ending. Chains, courtrooms, and Michael's sorrowful gaze. And this time, there might be no saving hand. Suddenly, the wail of police sirens tore through the night. Red and blue lights swept across the street. The gang scattered into the alleys. David froze. The bag slipped from his hands. A police officer grabbed him. The clink of handcuffs echoed like a song he knew too well. David did not resist. He lowered his head and walked heavily into the flashing lights. Inside, he knew, at this time, there was no escape. Back in court, the same cold white light, the same high walls. Michael sat above him once more, but now his eyes held not only sorrow, but disappointment. David Miller, you stand here again, so soon after your release. David stammered. I tried, but the words choked and died. Michael looked down at the file, then back at him. I believed you could change. I promised I would meet you when you walked free, and I kept that promise. But you chose the old path again. Each word cut like a blade. David buried his face, sobbing. It was no longer shame alone, but despair. The despair of a man who had been given a chance and lost it. Michael was silent for a long time. At last, he said softly, "This time, the sentence will not be light, but still, deep inside, I hope this is not the end for you." David looked up through tears, and in that moment, he saw not a judge, but an old friend, still holding a fragile hope. Then darkness swept over him. His body convulsed, and he collapsed onto the cold floor. When he awoke, it was not prison walls, but the dim light of a hospital room. The steady beep of a monitor filled the silence. His body ached, his lips cracked with blood. Beside him sat Michael, not a judge now, but simply a man in a plain shirt, a notebook in hand, his gaze steady and patient. "You're awake at last," Michael said softly. David's throat burned with shame. "You had to see me like this again?" Michael shook his head. "No, you stood against them. You fought back. You were hurt, but you are not the same as before." Tears filled David's eyes. "I've let you down so many times. I don't deserve..." Michael interrupted, firm yet gentle. "You still deserve so long as you don't give up. I don't need a perfect friend. I just need to see you truly trying." In silence, David reached out a trembling hand and grasped Michael's. "This time, I won't go back. I promise." Michael's grip tightened, warm and steady. Outside, dawn broke. Light spilled through the window. And for the first time in years, David carried a quiet faith. The road ahead would be hard, but there would be light. The days turned gently. David healed. He worked humble jobs, carrying crates, sweeping floors, waiting tables. Each coin earned in sweat was a quiet proof of change. At night, in his small room, he wrote in a notebook, "Day 1, I did not give up. Day 2, I kept going." The pages filled, yellowed with time, but heavy with hope. Michael visited often, sometimes with bread, sometimes with books, always with steady eyes that told David he was no longer alone. And so, life became simple. Quiet mornings with weak coffee, work that left his hands rough but his heart light. Evenings filled with writing small reminders that he was still walking forward. Season after season passed. Leaves turned, fell, grew again, and at last, David found peace. One spring morning, the city still half asleep, David sat outside his small lodging, coffee steaming faintly in his hand. His hair was white, his face lined, but his eyes no longer held fear or shame. Only a gentle light remained, the light of acceptance. He thought back over his life, the bright boy at Westbrook, the lost young man, the prisoner, the friend who wept in court, the hand that lifted him from despair. All of it flowed like a film in slow motion. And at last, David smiled. He no longer regretted. The past could not be erased, but the present was enough to forgive himself. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, he felt truly free. And so the story closes, gentle as the morning breeze, like a lullaby guiding a lost soul home. Now, let your own eyes drift closed. Picture the soft dawn light, the warmth of sunlight on your skin. Let your breath slow, your heart rest. Because life, like David's, always offers another chance. Not to start again from the beginning, but to know that each new day is a beginning of its own. Tonight, let the world wait until tomorrow. Tonight is yours. Your breath, your stillness, your deep, sweet sleep. Good night. He reached into his pocket and took out an old postcard, its edges worn and yellowed with time. On it were only a few simple lines. If one day you find this postcard, it means I'm still somewhere, in the sea, in the wind, in your smile. Helen couldn't hold back her tears. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling his warmth so real, yet fragile as a dream. He leaned close, his voice a whisper against her ear. Don't be sad, Helen. Life isn't only about goodbyes. It's also about the moments we find each other again, even if only in a dream.